All right.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CB8 Zooms, a webinar about public affairs. I'm Lori Boris. I'm a member of Community Board 8, and which runs from 59th to 96th Street, from the East River to Central Park, and includes the lovely Roosevelt Island. And we're glad that it does, because today is the subject of CB8 Zooms. We're going to discuss what's going on at Roosevelt Island and what's going to go on in the future. At in Roosevelt Island. We are joined by Paul Krikler, who is a member of CB8 and a resident of Roosevelt Island, and Ben Fhala, also a resident of Roosevelt Island and a resident board member of the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I thought that we would start with just a little bit of history about Roosevelt Island, which is a little bit unusual for this area. It's actually built on state land, so it is governed by the state. It's governed by the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation. It's home to about 12,000 people, according to the census. It's home to a Cornell graduate school. I had the pleasure to my daughter-in-law got her master's. She was in the first class and got her master's at Cornell on Roosevelt Island, which was great. And it has been in the past been home to many famous and infamous people. But we'll talk about that later. So I want to start with the government, because Paul, let's let you kick this off. You have filed a petition, or you're circulating a petition, from what I understand, about a month ago. And why don't you tell us about the purpose of your petition?
Yes, thank you, Laurie. Yes, I have a petition. We started it about 4 or 5 months ago. We've reached almost 1,100 people, which for an island the size of 12,000 people is very significant. And the petition calls for direct representation, the direct election of the directors of REOC, like Ben's position. The directors of REOC are the people who are the board who are supposed to oversee the operation of the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation, REOC. And we would like the residents of this island, and 1,100 people agree with that idea and speak a lot about it, to have representation in who's on that board who can oversee the people who run the place. There are two reasons for that, very simply. One, oversight's a good idea. We need to have very good oversight, and the people who care about this place most are the people who live here. And secondly, on a more positive note, there are so many people here on this island who I've met, I've only been here 3 years, who have great ideas of what can be done on this island, ideas big and small and everything in between. And if we had representation on the board, those ideas will come through more quickly and better for the betterment of this community. So that's why we have this petition. It's very clear that the people here want something to change.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's a very unique situation about the governance of Roosevelt Island, because you are basically elected, if I understand this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the people in the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation are selected by your state representatives. Is that correct?
So Ben could answer probably better who selects the directors, but the corporation itself are employees. These are the people who day to day run the place. What we're talking about is the board of directors, and I think Ben can better answer that, how they're appointed.
Okay, all right. That's a
I
very
think
good
just
segue into.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just succinctly, it's kind of interesting. So the resident board members are appointed by the governor, but she doesn't just appoint randomly people that reach her desk. Historically, there used to be a local election through RERA that would recommend names for the governor to appoint. RERA since then, I think for a few years now, hasn't been completely operational, so they
Can
haven't
I
been
interrupt you
bringing
for
up.
1 second and just tell us what RERA means? I mean, I know what it means, but tell us what RERA means. It's
I don't know. I've
I'll
been
tell
in the
you.
island for 2 years, so it's like prior to my days where it was really
Okay,
in its peak.
it's Roosevelt Island Residents Association, correct? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, go ahead. I'm
So,
sorry, I just didn't want to throw around the abbreviations without people knowing what's
no, I
going on.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay.
So Rira, the resident, as you, I can't even repeat that. So,
Roosevelt
so
Island
Rira,
Residents Association.
the Rira used to make, used to have elections. They weren't enforceable elections, but there were recommendations for our state um, elected officials to recommend those names to the governor, so the governor could appoint them. There are 5 seats that are allocated for resident board members. Historically, that's how the legacy board members were appointed. Over the last few years, because RERA hasn't been as active in promoting new names for delegates to or board members to be appointed, the our elected officials just started reaching out to the community to figure out who should they appoint by going to stakeholders in the community. If it's the senior center, if it's the Roosevelt Island Disabled Association, if it's just talking to leaders in the community to come up with names. And that's how the 3 names of the 3 junior resident board members were appointed: Dr. Melamed, Professor Tang, and myself.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So, so what if your petition is adopted, Paul, then what would happen would be there would be like direct elections. Would it? Are you trying to replace the RERA, or like what is the purpose of your petition?
It's not to replace anybody, it's simply to give for the first time the residency a direct election of those people who are board directors of REOC. It's as simple as that.
Okay. All right. That sounds reasonable. And
Could I Lori, would you mind if I add like a kind of like a
yeah, sure.
supplemental, just turning it into a debate? So it turns out it's also a question, besides the legalities and the structures, like, which could always change. It's also a question: who should REAC or who should Roosevelt Island serve? Should it serve only the people who live in Roosevelt Island, as you said very eloquently, the 12,000 people who live there? Should Cornell be part of those decisions? Should the people who live in Manhattan be part of those decisions? Who should have the final say or the most amount of influence over the future of Roosevelt Island? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I agree with Paul that something needs to change, or we need to move to a direction where we have more clarity. But I feel it's worthy of a conversation that is a bit larger than, should we just be self-managed on our own, or should we have influence by CB8, and should we have influence from other stakeholders, which I believe should have a say in the future of Roosevelt Island?
Okay. Yeah. All right. That sounds reasonable. And I asked you this before, and I'm not sure that uh I'm actually clear on it. You have state representatives, right? You are in enveloped in the CB8 structure, right? So you're part of CB8, which is why Paul is on CB8. And so you do have representatives like on the city council. Julie Menon is your representative on the city council. But when I asked you, like, if you have a problem, who do you go to? Do you go to Julie Menon, or do you go to the state people?
So if I can have a quick first stab at that,
Hmm.
it's a 2-part answer. If you have local problems, we should go to REOC to get local things fixed. It's like going to the city council here. The trouble is, until very, very recently, the last few weeks, REOC has been very unresponsive and uncooperative with the community. That has changed significantly in the last few weeks. But if we're asking bigger picture questions about the governance and how the place works and the lease and all the bigger stuff, then we go directly to our state elected officials, our state senator and our state assembly member, because they will have the ability to help us because it's a state matter.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I find it fascinating, really, that there's this island that has such a unique structure, and the history of it certainly, belies that. It's everything from it was like home to hospitals and people who were poor people, who couldn't pay their bills or whatever, and it's just evolved over the years. very much. So can we talk about like the housing, for instance? At one point, it was all rentals, from my understanding. And now, since we are in, New York, which is where, real estate is like the currency that everybody deals in, that some of the buildings are still rentals, but there have also become co-ops and condos, which I understand are, and so their structures are different. But still, everybody goes if there's a problem to the state. Correct? It's just this is very confusing for me, but I have a little pea brain.
Strange place to think about. I mean, I lived in New York for 20 plus years before I came here. And I think I shared the same view that many people had about Roosevelt Island. Oh, it's quaint. Oh, it's hard to get to because it's just the tram. And it's
Right.
a nice place to take your kids to sort of ride the bike around and take the tram across. When you get to live here, you realize it's not just the tram. We have the F train as well. Not right now. We have the ferry. We can bike off the island. So it's easier to get to than people realize. And I think because people don't realize it's so easy to get to, it's just seen as this place over here that looks different and is different.
Right. I always thought it was like romantic, it's like a place like to go for a day trip, like and I would take my nieces and nephews when they came to New York. I'd take them on a tram ride, and it was just like great. But yeah, then when you delve into it a little bit, there's a lot there. So what I mean, it's kind of like it reminds me a little bit. It's not exactly the same structure, but it reminds me a little bit of like Washington, D.C., kind of where it's a I don't know if this comparison has been made before, but it's governed by the federal government. It's not governed by people in Washington, and they do have representatives, but they're not allowed to do much of anything. So anyway, what do you see if your petition works, or is in fact, actually, let me ask you this: where does the petition go to? Does it go to the state? Does the state have to have a bill that establishes your direct uh, participation in the government?
Well, the first step will be to get our elected representatives from the state to come and listen to the residents. So when the busy season's finished in the next few weeks, my hope is to have both of them come to a CB8 meeting here on Roosevelt Island and not just receive the petition, but actually hear directly from as many residents as can come to tell them what they think. And then I don't think we have the answer to how it'll work. We're looking to our state representatives to help us navigate this and help us get something done.
Right.
Okay.
If I could add also, Lori, you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier about if someone has an issue on Roosevelt Island, where do they go to? And as Paul said, when the right administration is in place in Roosevelt Island, then it all stays in-house. It still all stays within the island. Unfortunately, it really depends on the administration. So whenever that administration just is not reactive to the public, then the public in many ways are stuck. They have nowhere to go to. So they'll go to their elected officials and plea for help. And if the elected officials, if it gets into their radar, then they'll send a few emails, and then suddenly the local administration will react. But unfortunately, as Paul was saying, we don't have a system in place that is a sustainable system that is very clear cut over all these. Take it even to a matter under New York law, every single entity such as ours has to have a governance committee. A governance committee's intention is to make sure that our bylaws are not breaking any New York laws, that they're up to date, that they reflect the will of I would say the public that this establishment is supposed to serve. Yet, although technically we have a governance committee, it was last seated over 6 years ago. Now, when I broached this, and when Dr. Milmed broached this, and when Professor Tang broached the subject to our overseers in across the pond, in Albany, we were told, well, we do have a governance committee. There's one person sitting in it that publicly said on video in one of our last meetings he doesn't want to be in it, and it never has been seated, or it hasn't been seated in 6 years, and our bylaws technically don't follow New York laws, and there is no one to modify them or to make them clear. So to Paul's request of where do we make change, that's really the place where you make change. You could start enacting and adding and modifying bylaws that include our include representation and figuring out what that means. But because there is no governance committee, there's nothing that we could do. At least on our end, all the new resident board members could do is ask for a meeting to take place. We're only 3 out of 8 sitting members, so it gets rejected or ignored.
Can I add something to what Ben's saying?
Of course.
Just to give people watching this some more context. I've only been here 3 years. Ben's been here a couple of years. There are many people who've been here since the 70s when this place first took housing. In fact, there are many people here who are original pioneers who were here, and they've been living their life since. But there are a lot of people who've been here 2, 3, 4 decades. And their experience will tell you, I'm not trying to mistranslate, I hope, that there have been various levels of collaboration and friendliness of the operating corporation over the years. But what we've all found is the last iteration, the last 3 or 4 years, it's been, how can I put it, particularly uncollaborative and particularly unhelpful. So as Ben said, there's nowhere to go if they don't want to help us. That's why even though we have much better and more helpful people managing and running the corporation right now, we can't assume that'll carry on forever. So we want to get some better structure in place overall. And in all these discussions, by the way, there are many, many people here who work for the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation, the employees who manage the grounds, who drive the buses, who are the public safety, who do a really fantastic job. So none of the comments that the people who sign my petition or I am making are about those people. It's simply about the direction and tone set from the very, very top.
Okay, thank you. You brought up something about the buses, and I did attend. No, it wasn't. It was a transportation committee meeting the other day, where they talked about changes that are expected to be made or that are planning to be made in the Roosevelt Island, the red bus, I guess, that goes from, or no, I think this was the city bus that goes, takes people off the island. And there was a lot of dislike of the transportation plan. So, what do you feel like the Department of Transportation doesn't listen to you? I mean, do you feel the feeling I'm getting from talking to you now is that, you want people to pay attention. You want people to like take the island seriously and like there are real people who live here and we have issues and we have disagreements, but we need to be listened to.
Yep,
Am I getting that right? Okay.
you absolutely are. It's perfectly put. Yes.
Okay, so well, let's talk about the transportation issues. Are you happy about the planned DOT change in the bus? I didn't think that people were from that meeting, but
If you
go
don't
ahead.
mind, I'll take the first stab at this only because I don't have a particular vested interest because I don't use that bus very often. I don't go that direction. I frankly heard as many people tell me they love the idea of the new bus because it goes to Costco and up to Astoria that way. And a lot of people say they depend on the current bus we have, particularly people who work at COLA, the hospital, who need to get there, and people and residents as well, who need to use that bus to get to accessible stations that the Q102 takes them to. So it's not my issue here. It's other people have views. Those who came to the CB8 meeting about this overwhelmingly of the latter case, they want to keep the Q102 the way it is. And so that's why we wrote the resolution we did to advocate for that. But I think if you walked around the island asking people, you get a mixed bag of responses about that particular bus issue.
Okay. And the other issue with transportation, from my perspective, which is, doesn't mean anything, but the F train has been not functioning, as far as I can tell, to Roosevelt Island in a long time. I mean, it's been a very, right? I mean, I find every time I go to, where was I going? Anyway, when I get to a stop where it says get on the F train, it always has a sign that says, we're working on it and, come back next year or something.
I think
So,
it's currently the MTA is doing a reconstruction work, and I don't understand the complete details, but it's about a 6-month project or so, we're told. It started, I believe, in August last year, and they're expecting to complete it. I would assume the beginning of Q2. At least that's the projection currently. And and the train is working. It's actually quite it's working on a really good schedule. It's 3 times an hour from 5 a.m. until midnight every day of the weekend, excluding the next few weekends, the next weekends where there's going to be no trains at all. Um, so I know it's a temporary measure. From what I understand, that it's due to the construction, a type of construction of the rail that just needs a total redo every 50 years or so, and we're due to a total redo. But hopefully it's temporary. I understand also, by the way, and Paul, I don't know if you've heard of this also, is that the plan, as far as I've heard, was once they fix it, is to change the whole course where maybe the F train won't even go through this trail, but a different train will go through it. So there's all these conversations. So I didn't get like an official word on it, but I've been hearing that the plan is that the new route of the F is more or less what it's going to be, and a different train is going to go through our temporary shuttle train.
Oh, okay, great. That sounds great. I want to take a break here and say that, which I realized I didn't say this at the beginning of the webinar. If you have a question for either Ben or Paul, there on the bottom of your screen there is a Q&A portion. We won't be doing the chat. The chat is not where you put questions. You put questions in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so if you have questions, and I see there are already a few, so we'll get to that. But let's go on with a couple of other questions that I personally have, and I'm the host, so I get to ask them. So transportation, okay. And also the New York City ferry has a stop. That's new. It's new to me. And so how is that working out? Do you find that people are taking the ferry as transportation, like daily transportation to go to work and stuff like that? Or is it more like, weekend trips to,
Oh, people take the ferry as much as they can. The limiting factor is it's a very infrequent service. It's at worst about once an hour, and oftentimes it's only once an hour, or once every 40, 55 minutes or something. So people can't rely on that to be a regular source, for most transit reasons. If we could get it doubled in frequency, I think that would change. I think it's a really nice addition to have the ability to get not only to Queens and different places, but to East 90th Street and then down to East 34th Street. So I use it a lot. I stick my bike on it all the time.
Right. Right. It's nice. And speaking of transportation, it seems to me that the island was, and I don't know if this was the intention, but it seems that, like, when we talk about sustainability, it seems that the island was kind of made for no cars. Because I mean, I have taken, I helped my son and his wife move onto and off of the island, and so I had to drive at that point to move their stuff. But it's not easy. I mean, you have to go, like, you basically have to go to Queens and then come back in to get into the island. But it's really, I find it very nice that you can be in a place where there really are not a lot of cars. So I don't know what to say about that other
Anyway,
than,
Laurie,
like,
when I first moved here, the biggest surprise I got, I moved here 3 years ago. It was during the pandemic. It was summertime of 2020. And I knew lots of things about this place. I'd been a lot before. But when I actually got to live here, you'd realize exactly what you said, how nice and quiet and calm it is. You can sit outside by the river with a nice coffee. There's benches everywhere, trees giving you shade, and it's not noisy from traffic. It's not noisy from the noise. The loudest noise we get is the FDR across the river.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. By the way, that's one of the main reasons why I moved to the island as well. And I would love it to have even less cars, but of course, we just have to live in the city that we're in. That cars have a place as well in our small little island.
right,
And
right.
Laurie, can I come back on one thing, if I may?
Yes,
So
please.
I was reflecting back on comments before about governance and about representation, elections, directors. I want to make it very clear also that I've only been here 3 years. I've spoken to a number of people, great many people who have done great many things here over the decades. They continue to try them, and there have been very significant efforts put in over the years by many, many people. So it's not just Benin who's arrived recently and myself who's arrived recently. A lot of those people,
Right.
did things I couldn't imagine doing given how difficult things were in the past. So don't get the impression this is only a new thing happening now. What's new now is we have a REOC, that seems to be the last few weeks much more responsive and much better, and everyone's very happy about that. But people here have been trying and working very hard for long before I got here, long before.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. There's incredible community that is very they're active. They call their politicians. They come to board meetings. Unfortunately, for the last few years, less so because RIAC just more or less ignored the public. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the public felt that they didn't have anyone to lean on, so the public stopped being engaged, which is similar to what happened with, unfortunately, with RERA. That RERA um, it used to be a power, from what I understand, because it predates me, it used to be a power place for the community to push and recommend board members, and it was the main driver to position new board members. But unfortunately, it lost its capability of doing so. So all these stuff that we had in place were very ad hoc, kind of glued together, and it worked really well for a lot of time, for a really long time, until suddenly it didn't. And now we're in that suddenly it didn't. And to Paul's point, the new temporary administration, by the way, no one said they're going to be there tomorrow morning, are doing an incredible job. They're open, they're communicating, they're involving the community, they're trying to be part of CB8 as much as they can as well, to make sure that they're not surprising everyone with new initiatives and last moment. And I think the new administration has been doing an incredible job, but they're just temporary. And we don't know that they're going to be there tomorrow morning because it's not even up to us.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to acknowledge that the pandemic changed everything. I mean, it really
Yep.
did. There's no such thing as what is normal or what is, because there just nothing is, and when people say things like, oh, I want things to go back to normal, it's what is normal? There's the new normal, and we have to like get used to it. I'm seeing a couple of questions that one person says, as a resident, I'm sick and tired of tourists using our tram as a joyride. I can understand that. I mean, from what I know about the tram, uh, it was built as a temporary mode of transportation way back when, and so what do you think that there is there any sort of idea about making uh, uh, Roosevelt Island more uh, um, what is the word I'm looking for? More tourist friendly.
I love that question. I appreciate that. And by the way, like just a flashback to history, a long time ago, way before my time, there used to be an elevator on the Queensbridge that would take residents up the elevator, and they would take a bus from there into the city. And if you look at the historical archives of complaints of residents, one of their main complaints was that tourists were taking over that elevator space. And um, my answer to that is tourists are always going to be part of this island. The question is, could we gain value out of them? Currently, if you really research it and look into it, you'll see that most of the tourists go on the tram. They pay 290 or whatever the fare of the time is. They turn to Cornell, which is not property that RIAC really generates any revenue from. They go through down the boardwalk, and then they come back onto the tram. Maybe they'll stop at the Starbucks to grab a cup of coffee, and they leave the island. So in the current setup, I could totally see it, and it frustrates me as well, because we have all these tourists come in and our streets get filled with garbage, and we didn't really make any revenue off of it. My personal, if I could just put a wand and make something change, is I would love for us to break away from the current structure of our payment scheme and move to a system that's more similar to the ferry, where if you just come on the tram once in a while, it's $5, but if you come on a frequency, then it's the 290 fee. That would enable us to cover costs of not only the tram but also garbage collection. And I kind of have to put this under a larger umbrella, and this is something that our residents need to understand, and all of us need to understand, is REACT's main mechanisms of generating revenue over the years were putting new buildings in. REACT was established to really build up a neighborhood from scratch. And every time a new building came in, REACT got a large sum of money. That large sum of money enabled it to do a lot of projects that are not really doable in a lot of other areas. But with that said, all of the buildings are built. we're moving into a new normal, and in 3-4 years, I'm projecting that RIAC will start losing money every year, and they won't be able to sustain all of the features that it's enabled to its population over the years, and is going to have to figure out, does it get more funds from New York State? Does it figure out a way to self-balance itself? Does it raise taxes on all of its population? Or do we come up with creative solutions to generate new revenue? And I think like one of those creative solutions is to untie ourselves from the standard Omni features. And by the way, very complicated to do, but I believe that it's the right move, to charge more for people who use the tram less frequently, and then build up our tourism to push tourists up north instead of pushing them down south. And there's a lot of things that we could do to push tourists up north, and that would help revitalize the northern area of the island and a lot of storefronts who don't have a lot of foot traffic, which causes it makes it really hard for stores to stay afloat on Main Street because there isn't enough foot traffic there. So I'm hoping that if we end up agreeing with that direction, then we rework what the tram is, which is both a tourist destination, because it is, and it's also a means of transportation. And by raising the price for the people who don't use it frequently, maybe you're not going to go on it as frequently. And even if you do, it adds funds to RIAC to enable us to revitalize and make sure that everything is working in 30 years from now as well.
Hmm. Okay, it's very interesting. There's a question from TJ Stein, who is a friend of mine and a wonderful man involved in his community. He lives on the Upper East Side, but he says it seems the island has become a wonderful location for tourists to visit. But is there anything that can be done to help the residents not be stuck on large lines on the weekends when they are trying to get back and forth to the city by the tram?
Can I have a quick go at this? Because I want to go back to what you said before, Laurie.
Yeah.
What is the context? What do people here, why do people here feel right now very aggrieved about this? It's because we're in the middle of the 6 months or 7 months worth of what happened was we have a much more limited F train. So basically, every tram that takes 100 people is now stuffed to the gills, and there are lines waiting because the trams are nowhere near enough to take over the slack. I think one shuttle train can take a whole day's worth of trams. It doesn't work. So people right now are very upset about this, in particular, having to wait in line. And in particular, when you get on there, you want to get home after a long day's work, or you're working in the evening somewhere, you have to, it's very tough if you're finding yourself waiting for 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes in a line going up Third Avenue, along with tourists, and people get resentful. Now,
Yeah.
this will go back to normal, please God. Very soon we'll go back to normal, have the F train back. But we still have to think about what we do with the tourists. Do we make, as Ben was saying, do we help them provide some funding for us? Do we make their experience better when they get here? But right now, people are feeling very, very bad about it because we're right in the middle of it.
And
I can
was there any increase in the tram service? Like, did it run more often
Yes,
when the
I
F
believe they
train?
did. Ben will know the details better, but the RIAC has done a lot of things to help provide mitigation. But there were some things they didn't do that the residents wanted. The biggest single example was preferential boarding. I won't go through
Yeah.
all the details of why it doesn't work or does work or can work or can't work. But people were very upset they didn't get that because that would have made life a lot easier for everyone to deal with the 6 months we were going through.
Right.
And I would add to that we made sure that people with disabilities and seniors who request to gain access to the tram skip the line. It took a lot of back and forth to make sure that happened, and I believe that now it does happen all the time. And that's critical because we want to make sure that someone that's disabled or senior doesn't have to stand in line for 3 hours. But to Paul's point, the tram was never designed to be a mass transit. It's a small box that we push in 100 people into it, which is not a very pleasant ride. I personally try to avoid the tram when that happens because I don't want to be in a box with 100 people without air conditioning or without air ventilation when COVID and other things are around us these days. So there's a lot of frustration on all ends, but end of the day, it can't be the only means of transportation. Once this is over, the subway will be back. We'll have the ferry. Hopefully, we could work with the MTA for a few bus options that go into Manhattan, which currently don't exist. But I think we need to create more variety of options if possible and work with stakeholders. RIAC, as I was saying, is running out of money. And as much as RIAC loves to spend, which it does, and spend as every government agency loves spending, we shouldn't allow them as resident board members to just spend, period, without thinking about our future. And our future, we're going to have a shortfall very soon in a few years, and we're going to have to figure out how do we balance our books. So yes, I agree. And I unfortunately, if it was up to me, we would have dedicated lines for our residents and workers during this emergency period of time. But according to our legal advisors at RIAC, it's just not legal. So I kind of stepped out of that question because that's more of a temporary measure. What is the right measure long term, which is why we came here for a conversation to include everyone in where we hopefully see a vision and how it works together to coming up with the best vision for the future of the island.
Mm. Do you have any idea? I mean, other than charging more for residents than, I mean, more for tourists than residents, do you
I
have
wouldn't
any
call it, by the way, that would be illegal to charge more for tourists versus residents. I would charge more for people who aren't
frequency?
frequent users.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. My bad. My bad. Frequency. Okay. But are there other ideas? I mean, do you have, I mean, it seems that, you have this like beautiful island in,
Mhm.
right, 15 minutes away from, the center of the world. What, are there other ideas,
Yeah.
to make it? Yeah. Go ahead. Talk about
So
that.
another idea that I've been trying to push with the Business Alliance, I don't remember their acronym here on the island. If we forget about this temporary issue of the subway being problematic, and I'm just thinking longer term, one of the larger issues longer term is when sunset happens at the same time where people come back from work. So if sunset is around 5:30 to 6 p.m. and all the tourists want to be on that tram because they want to see the sunset, which I completely understand that, especially if it's only 290. Hint on a better idea to raise the price for unfrequent users. But let's assume that we don't do that. What could we do to motivate tourists instead of going from Manhattan to Roosevelt Island during sunset to get them to go from Roosevelt Island to Manhattan, which is just as much as a beautiful view, and we'll have less people commuting out of the island during that time. So one of the stuff I was trying to pitch to like the Business Alliance is to do tour guides and motivate tourists to come onto the island an hour before sunset, get them to walk through the island, maybe give them a discount at one of the really wonderful restaurants that we have on the island, to get them to see the island, experience the island, maybe buy something on the island, and then have them go on the tram on sunset so they could have that beautiful photo that they want. So I don't think we have to be fighting tourists. We just have to come up with creative solutions and work with the community and the businesses to make sure that we're welcoming to tourists, because really tourists is the key to our future. Even though they might be a nuisance for us right now, I would love for us to be in a future where we're not raising taxes on our community to be able to live here, but we're taking advantage of this wonderful resource that we have of people that want to see our island and generate new revenues that make everyone happy.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I like that. I don't know if the other residents like it, but sounds good to me. Okay, let's see. What else can we talk about here that's relevant? It feels like there's so much to talk about because you're really, and I didn't realize how incredibly diverse Roosevelt Island is. That's another thing. There's lots of diversity, and I know that you've had some issues with um, disagreement, shall we say, about the way it should run. But democracy is messy, and we've all learned that, and we all. Okay. Let me wait. Oh, I have it. I have another. Oh, there are a couple of. I have a couple of questions. Okay. Um, I love the idea. Oh, this is TJ again. I love the idea of getting people up to the northern part of the island. Is there a way to get people to use the beautiful property for weddings there?
Oh, let me jump in, Laurie, in case you don't know, TJ. So there's a place called the Sanctuary, which is on the side of the island facing Manhattan, which these lovely guys bought and renovated 2, 3 years ago. It was in the New York Times last year. It was one of the best wedding venues in New York City because you can have an amazing outdoor wedding, tents over it, great building next to it. and the views of Manhattan while you're getting married. So the answer is yes, it exists already. These guys have booked out, I think, most weekends. I think it's fantastic. That makes
Wow,
weddings a lot.
that's really
And if I
great.
could add to that, something really, if you get off of the tram, the first thing you see is a selfie opportunity with the RI words, Roosevelt Island, where you could take a photo there. And now you have a choice. You could turn left or you could turn right. Turning right will take you to nowhere. If you look at it, it just looks like there is no boardwalk. There is nothing that would encourage you to turn right. But turning left, there's a gorgeous boardwalk and there's a bridge and there's Cornell and then the natural gravity would be to turn left. I would do the same thing. If we want to strategically realign and move tourists up north, I would do a couple of things. Very simple. The RI sign, let's move it to be on the right side. So let people cross the street and kind of like tease them into going in the direction we want them to go. Let's get a boardwalk up there so that people have a reason to walk up. And then Paul and I talked about this prior. There is an old, incredible tram that's sitting and collecting dust up north that no one ever sees. Why don't we put it in that traffic where users every few meters you could look ahead and see, oh, this looks interesting. Let me walk a bit more up north and see what that is. And there's a lot of really cool attractions if you just ignore the first 5 minutes of walking that are just not welcoming. And secondly, and this is something that will never happen probably, but something that I would love for it to happen, a lot of people go to Starbucks. I get it. It's like it's a franchise that everyone knows. You see Starbucks, you walk to it. The Starbucks is right next to the subway. Obviously, Starbucks would want to be there because they're right next to a transportation hub. But imagine a world where Starbucks was on Main Street, and for people to get their coffee, they have to walk up a little bit more. And now they see the Middle Eastern, and now they see all this wonderful opportunities and wonderful things that this island has to offer. So, if I had any say, which I don't, I would try to motivate Starbucks to move up north a little bit and work with them some sort of deal that it'll be worthwhile for them to do that as well, because that on its own also would create foot traffic that would go a bit more up north.
Yeah.
I have something I'd like to add to that one, please, Laurie.
Mhm.
So we have a wonderful bunch of restaurants here, one of which is a Mediterranean eatery. And the gentleman who owns that and runs that add-on, his idea is to take one of those or two of those old trams, put them outside the tram, put them outside the subway, and make tram burger. Think about it like a Shake Shack tram burger. And so I've introduced him to Rioch, and I hope they can find a way to get this to work. But it's things like that, simple things, and that's an iconic representation of Roosevelt Island, the old tram.
Absolutely.
That'd be
Yeah.
wonderful.
Exactly.
Um,
So agree.
a viewer named Jonathan Cohen said, "Speaking of the tram, what's the status of the abandoned building between the tram and the ferry station? Seems like a missed opportunity for a cultural attraction or something else. Just curious."
I can't get into that because of a lot of secret meetings that are about it. But so I can't get into that unfortunately at this time. But it's not simple, and it's something that is in everyone's attention. In the last meeting, I could say yesterday, Gerald, who is the legal person in our company, said that uh, currently it's safe, but it's not going to be safe forever. So unfortunately, that's something that needs to be taken care of as soon as possible because it is a hazard to the community as well, and it could become one in the next few years. So it's something that we're all aware of, but we don't have solutions yet, and most of the solutions that are coming up are in secret rooms that I'm not allowed to discuss.
Okay. And Ellen Polavy asks, and Ellen Polavy and I, full disclosure, went to China together a few years ago. And her question is, how would you get around the MTA rule against preferential treatment for a group of people? She likes Ben's idea about frequent users, but how could you structure that inside the tram being a part of the general subway omni system and subject to its rules?
That's a very fair question. One is I don't know the full solutions yet. It's more of a brainstorming session. The Omni has a lot of features that we didn't completely tap into yet. There's express buses, which are more expensive. There's Omni to the airport, which is more expensive. It's really a conversation with MTA, Omni. There are complications and wrinkles, but also I could give you more of the wrinkles because we didn't talk about them. Um, Students who go to school use the tram and then they have to take a bus. we have to make sure that students don't have to double pay a double fare whenever they're using the tram. There's a lot of variants that we didn't solve yet. It's really big picture. This is the vision of where we think that we should go. And now let's get the stakeholders involved. Let's get CB8 to say, we like this idea. Let's get our elected officials to say, yeah, let's look into it. There's a probability that it won't work, but instead of us saying we're not going to do anything because it might not work, let's try to figure out who could make it work. And from my understanding, CB8 could have a big impact on it. Menon could have a big impact on it. It's about getting the MTA to update Omni to reflect the needs, to reflect our needs as well. So you're right. It's not going to be a clear cut, let's vote on it and we're going to do it. It's more of a question, how do we transition there in 5 years? Because in 5 years, we are going to need to come up with new ways of generating revenue. And I don't want it to be raising rents, and I don't want it to be draconian other things that might happen on the island when we have this incredible resource that we're not leveraging.
Okay, Joyce Short asks or suggests, I guess, put food trucks up Main Street like they do in Long Island City. So there is a good reason to walk up Main Street.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Anything with food trucks coming to this island. I mean, my personal one would be at some point having the Roosevelt Island Food Truck Festival. But not very often. I mean, again, I want to be sensitive to people who don't want this place to become overrun all the time, 24/7. But once in a while during the nice months, have a thing like the food truck festival. Be great.
Yeah, that sounds
And by
great.
the way, just a side note, technically, we have a subcontract with a few managers who own the real estate on Main Street or own the rental rights on Main Street. And part of those contractual obligations don't allow us to do that more than, I believe, 3 times a year. But areas like the boardwalk, we don't have any stipulations in them. So we could always put food trucks on the boardwalk. We could always put food trucks in other areas that are not actually Main Street. So there's ways around it. But I completely agree. I think that React does do that already. And especially during weekends and especially in the summer. But all really good ideas. But I would argue that the most critical thing is coming up with a vision of the footpath. So when people get off of the tram or they get off of the subway, they need a reason to turn right instead of turning left. And right now, we're not providing a compelling reason for them to turn right instead of turning left. And as soon as we do, then we could start figuring out the details of how do we generate revenue out of it and how do we create an incredible experience both for the residents and for the people who visit us. Can I give you just one more thing? One last thing. We have so many tourists on the island. If you do a survey with the tourists and ask them how many of them walked on Main Street, I would bet you that a large amount of them would say they never did, and the furthest they went was Starbucks. If we come up with ideas that are exciting for the younger generation and exciting for tourists as well, we don't have to only rely on people that are going on the tram. We could also rely on our students and Cornell folk to go up north. So we just need to work together as a community to come up with creative ideas that would encourage the north to be revitalized.
Okay. We have another question from an anonymous person. Oh, I just lost it. Ben, it says, Ben, I agree that we need to make tourism more profitable for the island. Is there any plan to better advertise Lighthouse Park and the sculpture to direct tourists that way?
I love that question. No, there isn't any plan, but we should have those plans, and we should start. I believe in kind of creating 5 focal points that would that would move the direction up north. But that's exactly the goal. The goal is to get people all the way up to the lighthouse. And I think step 1 is moving the RI sign from where it's at to be a bit more up north, more or less.
Can I jump on the end of that? I mean, this place, Roosevelt Island, has so much to offer. We've had various wonderful festivals in the past. So, for example, there's a Fall for the Arts festival every year. I've learned in my 3 years here, there are a ton of sculptures on this island all over the place, north and south. So one idea would be to have Sculpture Day and invite people to come here and look at the wonderful sculptures that we have. I know, for example, we have a wonderful musician here, Sushil, who has a band. They play at the local restaurant, and he put a music festival on here a few years ago. We're talking again now with Ryok about putting a music festival on again at some point. There's lots of ways of doing this on this island. That's what I was referring to earlier. it's not just getting proper oversight of RIOC, it's getting all these small to large ideas that'll in total give us a wonderful change to this island, but nothing dramatic and jarring, but just a nicer place to live, even nicer.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds wonderful. I mean, it sounds like there are a lot of, well, actually, let me say this. The biggest takeaway that I've gotten from this program is that there, the city, from what I can learn, is not really all that involved with Roosevelt Island, right? There's no money. You don't get any money
Don't
from
take
the
anything at
city.
all. Zero money, certainly, and hardly any involvement from any agencies. Maybe
Yeah. So that's certainly an issue. And I don't know how you deal with that, but you do need to make some. Sorry, my dog just came back from her walk. Patty. Um,
I can
so yeah,
piggyback on that in the meantime until the dog stops
yeah,
barking.
no, no.
That we're literally just, and I think like Paul, you were in that meeting yesterday as well, in the real estate committee advisory meeting, where it became public and everyone is now aware, it's in public record, that RIAC has started to negotiate with New York City over extending the lease of Roosevelt Island from the original 100 years to, I think was mentioned, another 33 years. This is a really good opportunity to talk about, okay, let's change a few things when we renew this, if we're renewing it. So this is really the opportunity for us to interject in as these negotiations are taking place and get CB8 involved, get our elected involved, get the city involved to figure out what tweaks do we need to put in place to make sure that we're going to be happy for the for the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years.
2068. Right now, it's
Yeah,
supposed to
exactly.
expire in 2068, and 40 years before that is only 4 years away from now. And that's a magic marker for people who care about financing of buildings and financing of acquisitions of properties here. I want to add something that Ben said. There are people on this island who also believe that we shouldn't just assume that this island should have the lease extended. There are some people here who would argue that maybe we shouldn't do that. And I'm not here to cast my view either way. I'm not expert enough, but this is the time to have the conversations.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about Cornell, because I'm not certain about this. Does Roosevelt Island get any financing from Cornell? I mean, it would be impossible not to, since, I mean, go
I
ahead.
believe the land itself was basically returned back to the city as part of the deal. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe that we make. I don't think we're making a lot of money off of Cornell currently. I think we made money when the deal took place, and we might make again when another construction takes place. But I would have to get back to the team to give you an accurate answer. But we could definitely not rely on income coming from Cornell, because the land of Cornell is not part of state land anymore. It's part of city land.
I got an answer here from someone who works at Rio who says we do get money from Cornell, but I don't know how much or the mechanism. So there is some, maybe somebody else who's watching can answer in Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Voice
thanks
sense
for that, Paul.
All right. Well, this has just been absolutely fascinating. And I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would like to say that we haven't covered, or I'm looking at the questions and
I
I'm
have
not
one thing I
sure.
want to say. It's a
Yeah.
direct appeal to people here who live on Roosevelt Island, who don't know much about what CB8 does or CB8 Roosevelt Island Committee does. I joined the committee 2-3 years ago. I joined someone called Lynn Strong as co-chair a couple of years ago. But only in the last few months have I decided to make this much more active, because basically reacting to the F train shutdown. And right now I've got a few people who've come forward who want to get things done on the island as well, who are going to come to the CB8 Roosevelt Island Committee meetings. So I guess to get to the point, I would love as many people as want to get involved and be part of this future. It's the first Mondays of each month. That changes when there's holidays in the way. Go to the CB8 Manhattan website so you can sign up. It's by Zoom mostly, not always. I just love people to come and join this committee and to join. I don't see it as a committee meeting. It's just a place to come so we on Roosevelt Island can get together with RIOC directors, RIOC, other people, and start making some changes on the island, or more changes, not some changes, some more changes. Now that we have a more cooperative RIOC to work with, I think we have an opportunity I want to take advantage of.
All right. That sounds great. Ben, anything you want to say?
I think it's hard to follow Paul on that one, but all I could say is that the new resident board members are open. We're doing our best to instill that vision into the RIAC employees as well. The Korean administration is very open as well, and whatever we could share with the public, we do our best to make sure that we do. And we would love to see new faces. There's a lot of people on this island. There's a few people that are staples that are in every one of our meetings. But we would love to see new faces and to see more involvement in the community. You're welcomed, and you could always email us as well. We respond to all of our emails. So it's ben.fhala@riac.ny.gov. You could email me at any time, and I could pull in other board members or staff members as needed. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to serve this community.
Okay, that sounds great. And we have one more, and I think this is a perfect thing to end on. That an anonymous attendee says, "I would love to see more artisans sell their homemade crafts."
I would love
And
that.
right?
By the way, those who don't know it, we have a farmers market that's fantastic every Saturday. It's usually in the center of town during the nice warm months. It goes underneath this helix we have under the bridge when it's cold. But it's amazing. We have local artisans selling things there, from soup to bread to microgreens. It's fantastic.
And it's year round?
Year round, every weekend.
Okay, could I, and TJ is asking you to repeat your email.
Oh, fair enough. Now I have to make sure I say it correctly. So my first name, last name, but ben.fhala, which hopefully is in the info of this email, of this invite, at riac.ny.gov. Okay,
great. Well, thank you both very much. This has been incredibly educational and informative, and I thank you very much. I also want to thank Will Brightbill, who's the wizard behind the technology that gets us in front of you. He's the district manager, and we would be lost without him. And you can see it. You can see this program if you caught it late, or if you didn't catch it at all, or you want to tell somebody about it. It can be seen on YouTube, on Facebook, and on our website, which is www.cb8m.com. And also, I want to thank Kevin Wu, also, who's the assistant district manager, who helps us with the advertising and the technical stuff as well. So thank you very much. My name is Lori Boris. We'll have another CB8 Zoom next month, and thank you for watching.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Lori.
Bye. Have a